Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Haptics Club podcast. I am Ashley from Technohaptics. I'm joined by the Haptics Club crew. We've got Manu from Unity, Eric from Razer, and Brian from SenseGlove. The Haptics Club is a team of crack people who just love haptics. We're haptics nerds. And our goal is to raise awareness of all the amazing tech and people happening in the space and foster some cool discussions around it. Today, we've got a very special returning guest, David Parisi, the Dibner Chair at NYU Tandon, editor of ROMchip Journal, and author of one of the best haptic books, hands down, Archaeologies of Touch. He's been dubbed the bad boy of haptics by us, and he's recognized as one of the few people that's just truly candid about the space, and that's why you've got that nickname, so feel free to update all your accounts. Before we jump into today's episode, we want to share today's sponsor, GrewUs. GrewUs develops a wide range of acoustic sensors and actuators for all types of industries and applications, so be sure to check out GrewUs, and thanks to them for sponsoring this episode. And of course, thehapticsclub.com is the place you want to go to check out our blog posts, articles from your favorite hapticians, and a peek at our upcoming guests. And of course, if you're warming up to the summer, we've got some Haptics Club tank tops that you can do, a little cup for you with our Haptics Club logo, so you can support us, which we'd appreciate. Hapticsclub.com/shop. But that's enough talk. Let's dive right in. David, so great to have you back here. So great to have you back here.
Thanks. Thanks for the invite. Appreciate it.
So it's been a little bit since we've chatted. Some kind of like major updates on your side. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of like what you've been up to? And you've got your new gig at NYU, which is super exciting. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so this is kind of a return home for me. I did my PhD here and finished, I think it's safe to say it was a long time ago. I'm not going to put a year to it. In another department, in another school at the university. I'm now back in the Tandon School of Engineering, formerly Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute. NYU and Brooklyn Poly merged in 2009. School was renamed in 2015. So I'm in a completely different school in the Department of Technology, Culture, and Society and the Integrated Design and Media program. So it's really exciting place to be. There's a lot of really creative energy on the ground here. That I'm happy to be part of.
Sweet. What kind of stuff is happening within the program? Because there's like a lot of different schools running, focused with like different interests, or like, focused whether it's on hardware, whether it's on more design. Like, tell us a little bit about kind of like what you guys are up to.
Yeah, so I'm still sort of learning as I go here, but we've got two basic wings. We've got a Science and Technology Studies wing, which is really sort of where I'm most at home. And then we've got this design wing, which again, is really exciting for me to be a part of because it's a lot of creative energy, a lot more hands-on, technically oriented folks. The way it was put to me is it's an art program or it's a design program for engineers who want to be artists. So we get a lot of people who come here, intending to work on technical things and then take this really creative turn. So that's been today is actually our end of the semester project showcase. So there's a lot of like nervous student energy, excited student energy here as they get ready to show off what they've been working on all year, all semester long to the public.
Oh, that's super cool. Have you seen some of the stuff? Like, what kind of stuff are you expecting to see? Are there like certain trends that are kind of going on, things that people have kind of like talking about throughout the year that they've been excited about?
Yeah,
AI is just like the one thing that a lot of people are just like diving deep into. I'm curious.
It's been, it's kind of all over the map in terms of where students head with it, just relevant to this podcast. And I'm blanking on the student's name right now because it was kind of a whirlwind yesterday. But we did have one student who's working on a prosthetic with a haptic feedback armband that gives feedback based on proximity. So basically a way for amputees to tell when the prosthetic hand is getting close to an object as like a vibration alert on the armband. So I saw that yesterday. It was really cool. I'm looking forward to checking it out again today when I visit the showcase. Yeah, it's one example. Let's see. We have some really just fun, creative projects. Another one yesterday, a student did a project on shopping grocery lists, and basically like the sort of mundane aspects of grocery lists. And despite the fact that they're mundane, they sort of hold this like really meaningful place in our lives. There's a lot of discussion about how grocery lists have changed with the addition of like algorithms and digitization to the old like paper, handwritten, scratched on the back of a napkin, hyper couponing. We talked a lot about that. So just this way of like thinking about personal connections through this really fun art project this student did around
really cool.
Yeah, so
that's awesome.
All over the map.
Awesome. So yeah, something for folks to hopefully be able to check out and follow along online. I'm also curious because you've been out about doing different events and things. You're kind of on the pulse of like what's happening within the haptic space. Has there been other things that you've kind of like seen pop up that have been shifts from the past few years? Have you noticed anything kind of like key changes within the space?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been a little bit more on the sidelines of last year just because of the everything with the move. But one nice thing about being in New York is I've been on the ground a little bit more for some of the stuff that's happening, locally here. I got to see, I think we talked about this a little bit on Twitter. I got to see the Music Not Impossible demo, basically like a relatively simple actuator-based system, vibration-based system that translates music into vibration. I can't remember how many actuators. I want to say 8 or 12. I got to try that out. I'd read a lot about it. They actually did a demo at Tandon a couple months ago. I was really curious about that, having read a ton about it, and was really impressed by like the thoughtfulness of the project and how much work went into the composition. So I got to check that out. Did Haptics Symposium, which I think we'll probably talk a little bit about, the IEEE Haptics Symposium in Long Beach last month. Let's see, Science and Technology Studies Conference in Honolulu in November, which had a few talks on haptics that were really interesting. So a little bit of an international discussion around haptics from a non-technical standpoint. So good to see that discussion happening in the context of science and technology studies, where it really hasn't happened in my time in that field. So it's just sort of a quick run through. I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything major. I think that's it. Oh, Society for Cinema and Media Studies, one more thing where we had a chance to talk about. There was a couple of one talk on teledildonics that did sort of a history of sex tech at that conference, and then my paper on the OWOW electric shock bodysuit that again, I'm sure we'll loop around to that later on.
Cool. In terms of the talk in Honolulu, it sounds like that was pretty impactful for you. Like, what were some of the aspects that were like different that you weren't expecting? Was it just like the fact that they were having the conversation and they don't normally kind of talk around that subject? What was it?
Yeah, so it was one of the things that was exciting for me about that, having the conversation in that space, was just to see sort of the signal flare going up. They put out a call for papers. I think they had 10 talks planned. A bunch of those ended up getting nixed because the travel to Honolulu, actually, it was pretty challenging for folks. But the fact that there was such a strong response to the call really, I think, let people know that there was an interest in having a conversation around this technology in the context of STS. So really putting issues of ethics, issues of privacy, issues of history on the table for a broader audience. And I know at the European STS conference, which is coming up this summer, I know there's going to be another couple of haptics panels there. So really good to see that conversation picking up steam. I think, one of my persistent gripes about haptics as an interdisciplinary field, I'm doing air quotes for people who are listening on the podcast, is that it's interdisciplinary in sort of a small range of fields. So it's really interdisciplinary, but those tend to be mostly STEM fields, and they're not drawing a lot from people with humanities training. So seeing that interest take shape across this international context is really fun and exciting for me.
That's very cool. I love that. Yeah, I think to see it grow and to see haptics kind of just prop up at some like not as relevant events that you'd expected at has been super exciting. I've seen something similar at like more traction at like VR events, like AR events. Yeah, like a lot of like computer interfaces just like really just going hard on the haptic space. So super excited to see more of that. And we'll try to share that the links and things that we can so people can just learn more. Because I think a lot of folks don't realize just how many events are happening and really the importance of just the future of technologies, like having these minds come together and like talk about things that are a little bit outside of day to day, like you mentioned, like ethics and like privacy, like those kind of things. We don't get to touch on too much. For someone who's maybe like less knows less about the space, because we still have a lot of people when you say haptics, they're just like, I don't like what are you talking about? What are some of those kind of like niche areas that are propping up like around the ethics? Like why does that matter? Like what is it and why does that really matter? Kind of in like the most concise way you possibly can.
Yeah, so I think in some ways, and so science and technology studies tries to put these ethical issues on the ground, in a really tangible way. So they try to get us to grapple with, with what happens to technology once it gets deployed widely in social and cultural life. The challenge for haptics for a long time has been that technology seems to be so far off that those concerns can feel very abstract, right? So what does it mean to have a concern around privacy, to have a concern around consent, when you don't really have technologies that are doing much other than like a smartphone vibration or a wearable vibration? But as we start to get more intimately connected with these technologies, all of a sudden it matters that we have security with our communication with these devices. So it matters. It's really important that we know if we're being touched remotely by someone. It's really important that that person is who we think they are, right? If we're thinking about questions of consent, digital consent, it's really important that we can be secure in those contexts. So that's one issue again that seemed, when I started studying this stuff 20 some odd years ago, it seemed really like it seemed like a concern that we didn't quite have to worry about yet. And increasingly, that's less and less the case, right? Like increasingly, this stuff is here. And again, we need to know who's touching us in what context. We need to take greater control over these new forms of touch as they start to emerge and develop.
Love that. Speaking of touching things, one of the topics that we talk about a lot, and I think you and I really kind of bond over this, is this idea of like haptics gives you the ability to touch grass, the ability to like feel the world as if it's real life. You use the at the Haptic Symposium, you'll feel parkour with the OO gaming shirt. Like this is one of those kind of pain points that I think probably a lot of technologies face, of this like over promising, under delivering. And you've seen this, like you mentioned, like 20 years is a long time in this space. The industry hasn't been around that long. Like, tell us a little bit about your findings and maybe like what you spoke about at the Haptic Symposium around this topic, because it's like you've seen it from history and you've seen it like come to today, and like it's still very much apparent of over promising like legendary level haptics. It's like, what the F does that even mean? Like, it means nothing. So yeah, let's dive a little bit into that.
Yeah. So I've worked with that idea of haptics over promising for a while now, and I'm able to sort of go back and, we've talked a lot, you and I together, about the sort of routines or the conventions that emerge, the tropes that emerge in talking about haptics, to the point where, you can look back in 1998, you can look back in 2008, you can look back in 2018, and you can see almost verbatim the same paragraph sentences written about what this technology is going to do. It's always about 5 years out from whatever year we're in. And that, that story of soon you'll be able to, or now you're able to have this realistic, like high fidelity experience with a haptic technology. That story I think is a little bit it's a little bit tiring if you've been following it for a long time. It's a little bit frustrating that the same stories keep getting told around the technology over and over again. But I think I'm sort of past the point of just framing this as a failed promise, because I think the people who are making this promise are maybe not like they're sort of making it tongue in cheek, right? Like, I don't think that whoever writes the copy that says, and this is a collaborative effort, by the way, I'll circle back to that in a second, but this is a collaborative effort. So it's not just the marketers, it's not just the academic researchers who are trying to translate their research findings into language that's intelligible to like a grant committee or a funding board. It's not just tech journalists. I think everyone bears some level of complicity in like writing this story together. You know, if you're a journalist and you want to like write an attention grabbing headline, you're going to write like "you'll feel parkour" because that sounds really weird and strange and magical. Even though "you'll feel parkour" is a completely nonsensical string of words for me. I don't know what that would even feel like. So rather than talking about this just as a story of failed promises, just as a story of, marketing promises you one thing and then doesn't deliver on it, which is what marketers tend to do, stock and trade a little bit. Rather than talking about it that way, I think I want to reformat it as a way of thinking about a new type of experience, a new type of sensation. So I've started using this phrase, the technohaptic reel, which is a little bit clunky, but hopefully I can make it stick. And this is the idea that we're promised a thing that the people designing the technology know it can't deliver. The people marketing the technology know it can't deliver, right? You'll feel every blade of grass, right? I mean, you'll feel the texture of an orange. Love to talk about oranges. Fur is another thing they like to promise it that you'll feel. And again, like, I don't think that people who are saying these things actually mean it as a hard claim, right? They don't mean it as a falsifiable claim, because if they did, they would know right away that like a little burst of vibration, a jolt of electricity can't give you grass, right? It can't give you fur. It can't give you the texture of an orange. It can't give you parkour. It can't give you with the OO vest like the sensation of being shot and stabbed, right? And you don't want it to in a lot of cases, right? You don't want to know what it's like to be shot or stabbed, I think. So what's going on here is the promise, and then on the audience side, maybe also the expectation of a new category of experience that is a hybrid category, that is not just what it's like to feel grass. Because if you want to feel grass, like, go outside and touch grass, right?
Just go feel grass.
Go feel grass. If you live in, depending on where you live, that might be a little bit more challenging, but we don't necessarily want those realistic, like high fidelity sensations from the technology, or we're not expecting them, right, at this stage of development. So maybe if we're a little bit more, if we sort of confront the artifice of these sensations, right, if we confront the fact that they're not going to feel like a real thing, they're not even going to have like the hint of, I don't think like the vibration in, as good as DualSense is, I don't think the vibration in a DualSense controller gets you to a blade of grass at all. I think it can semiotically triangulate a blade of grass by showing you the blade of grass on the screen, by sounding like the rustling of a body as it moves through grass, and then by giving you like a little like burst of vibration. Then you might think, oh, this is kind of evocative of a blade of grass. But if you were just to feel that vibration without those other two semiotic elements, without those other two senses, it would not feel anything like a blade of grass, right? So haptic technologies, as much as they sort of claim to achieve this like independence from audiovisual technologies, or this new mode of accessing virtual worlds, they're still really dependent on vision and hearing to again, to triangulate that sensation. So I think what's been productive for me is to consider this as again, a new hybrid category, right? It's not haptic, it's technohaptic, which is maybe redundant because like haptics is already techno, so maybe we don't need the techno. But I want to sort of spotlight that relationship. I want to spotlight that new and really curious and artificial and just fun to experiment and play around with, rather than this notion of a transparent window. And then the other thing, like one last quick point, I think if we dial back a little bit and we consider technologies as technological experience from a cultural standpoint, all of this is relative to like current state of the art, right? So in 1998, if you fired up a PlayStation 1 and played Metal Gear Solid, you might have said that it looked very realistic, despite the fact that it is not photorealistic at all. But relative to previous iterations of the technology, it was a significant step forward, right? So we might have talked about it in realistic terms, despite the fact that it sort of fails like an absolute test of one-to-one like sensory realism. So I think with haptics, it's also good to keep that in mind, right? And to not necessarily assume, I think the trajectory that you hear laid out really often is a trajectory similar to audiovisual technology. So audiovisual technology, especially graphics technology, progressively, like iteratively, gets you closer to. And there's been that same assumption with haptics, right? That we're going to iteratively get closer to a real, and that might not necessarily ever happen with haptics, right? For a whole bunch of reasons that I'm sure your other guests have talked about at length, right? There's a lot of ways that this technology cannot deliver on that promise, and maybe it never will get to that point of what I think Dave Birnbaum on this podcast called perfect haptics at one point, a phrase that I love, but is a little bit troublesome. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a way to go at this from more of a cultural standpoint and more of a historical standpoint that allows us to not see those claims as hard claims, but claims that are more playful and maybe as a result not quite so frustrating.
I love that. And I think just like what you're touching upon, it's like we can just have a bit of fun with it and keep it at that fun. But at the same time, I think embracing the fact that, and what many of our guests have proven, it's, trying to replace like the feeling of your hands, like that's wild. Like I think we understand at this point that we can bridge science to a certain point, but often the technologies we have are used to like complement us, to support us, to do something that enhances what we're doing rather than it being a replacement. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And kind of leads me to a spicy question of like what the future looks like. So it's like we've chatted with you before. I'm curious if this the notion of what the future of haptics has changed for you, because I think this is a really good vibe in terms of like even helping other people understand the like marketing of haptics. It really does put it in a kind of like a brighter light. It begs more opportunity for playfulness, for change, for creativity around it, tongue in cheek, which is like a really fun space. Like, where's the future of haptics, do you think, going more for like a kind of consumery side? And maybe we can talk about it also from more of like a academic side of where you're seeing that go as well.
Yeah, so I think this question, I tried to put this question on the table in my talk at Haptics Symposium last month a little bit, because I think there's a feeling that I've had for a while now that the field is, what's happened in the last, let's call it 40 years, is you've had this field emerge that didn't exist before, right? We can qualify that in all sorts of ways, but you got this field, this formal field of study around haptics technology emerge, become institutionalized. There are now like regular haptics conferences. There have been since the 1990s. There are more of them now than there were, a decade, 2 decades ago. That's really exciting. That field is incredibly well developed. It's got a set of experimental conventions and techniques and apparatuses, and it's 5,000 publications a year, I think, on the topic, academic publications a year. I might have leveled off a bit in the last like decade or so, but that's a really significant achievement, and it's been really exciting for me to track the emergence of a new field. Whenever we get the emergence of new fields that are stable, that manage to stick around, that manage to have these conventions stabilize, that's, I think, a significant moment. What has been slow to happen is translating what goes on in that academic research field into daily life. And I'm not sure how much folks working in that space are invested in seeing that transition happen and seeing what goes on in the lab migrate out of it, right? And for a lot of reasons that I'm not going to get into here, there seems to be this disconnect between what goes on the academic side and what goes on the industry side. And really quickly, like when I gave that talk at Haptics Symposium, the question I led with was, how many people in the room were aware of the launch of the OWL vest? And I want to say, I don't know how big the audience was, but it was large. I only saw 6 hands go up. And it is probably, I would say, like the most notable product launch of 2023, just in terms of what I've talked about as the distinction between like mundane everyday haptics and spectacular haptics, like the type of haptics that get you like clickbaity headlines in gaming press, right? The WoW Vest was very much that device, and it was really telling that the people in that room who are tapped into the academic side are just sort of maybe not paying attention to what happens on the product release side, as if there's nothing to be learned or that's applicable to them, right? There's no reason for them to have like that, that news alert set up, or just their sort of feelers out there to be attentive to what's going on the product design and development side. So this is a very long-winded way of saying, like, I am still pretty conservative in terms of like the pace of technological change, the pace of technological adoption. I think we're in a moment, and I'm really curious to hear what folks on your side of the podcast screen would have to say on this. I think we're in this post-hype moment now. Like, we've come out of another hype cycle. Now that VR seems to have like the air has gone out of the metaverse balloon a little bit. A lot of the investment dollars seem to have dried up that were being pumped into the industry. I think we're in this post-hype moment where we've realized that the promises that were made from, let's say, like 2015, 2016, 2017, to like Zuckerberg basically like putting a knife in the industry by rebranding it as the metaverse, right? I think that was like inflated the balloon and then also like helped burst it. I think that we're coming out of that hype cycle, and we're going to see over the next few years which of those devices, which of those technologies is going to be stable, is going to end up enduring, and which ones were just really fueled by that anticipated adoption, like widespread adoption of VR. So yeah, I mean, this is not the spiciest answer to this spicy question.
A little bit.
But I tend to be really conservative about forecasting technological change. I think there's a lot we can learn still by studying the cultural reception of this technology, and a lot that I think people in the industry and people on the academic side could gain from just like more engagement with on the ground reception of the technology once it gets out into the wild. That's where I'll stop with that one. And I can hang out for a little bit more time if we have.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it definitely is a little bit spicy in terms of we've kind of got like silos. People are working a little bit in silos. I'm sure like a lot of people in the kind of like consumer product space don't really look to academia as a place for inspiration because it's like, yeah, it's not ready. It's like half baked. Like it's conceptual. It's just kind of like an idea. But every so often there's like a trickle that comes out of someone from academia who's trying to translate their tech into something more real. I think like the Phantom Glove is one of those examples. We had the guys on where it's taking kind of like a wild idea and trying to turn it into a real product. So that's, yeah, I'm really curious. I think that's something that begs for more conversation around, how, like what needs to happen to kind of like maybe bringing those worlds together is a good idea. Maybe it's a terrible idea. I guess it's really hard to say. I can't think of any historics around it. But in terms of also more like future thinking, like in your space, like what are you excited about? Maybe not like 10 years down the line, but what are kind of like these immediate things that just like keep you in this world? Like you've been this for a long time. There's a lot of stuff that's like should have happened, didn't happen. Like what keeps Dave like amped and just excited to be in the space and to continue sharing and learning and growing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of this there's this dopamine hit that comes from waiting to see what's going to like catch fire in the popular imagination, and you do see stuff percolate up every now and then where it manages to like grab some headline cycles, and so that from that part of it will be sort of enduringly interesting to me. In my new role here, one of the things that I'm trying to start, this is the place where Michael Knoll did his PhD research in the late 1960s, early 1970s. The first 3D force feedback joystick was he developed that while he was at Brooklyn Poly. So I'm looking forward to like starting this, hopefully starting this history center, hopefully starting this archive, a little bit of a lab where we can play around with technologies. I think that initiative for me hopefully will bring some folks out of the woodwork. I think we need like a better archive of the field's history. We need a better archive of there's the industry histories. I think are really hard to wrangle, and they just sort of disappear. There's a lot of companies that have come and gone without leaving any sort of like enduring archival trace. I think we need to do that. So that's just like in terms of like my own work and what I think we can do. That's one thing that's exciting for me. I haven't been in a place where I've had the resources to really make something like that happen. And I think there's along those lines, this interdisciplinary conversation has been gaining steam, and I think there's a lot of willpower to see that conversation continue and to see that conversation expand, to include more people from humanities, to include more people from arts, so that we can look at this challenge from all sorts of different vantage points. And maybe the productive and spicy way to wrap this answer up is to say, like, I've always been ambivalent about the impact of this technology. So one of the reasons that I keep tuning into this conversation, even though at times it can feel a little bit repetitive, is because I'm not sure that if any of these devices, like any of these wild-eyed devices, all of a sudden sees widespread adoption, I'm not sure if it's going to improve people's lives or make them worse, right? So that's this thing that I'm kind of always vigilant for. And what attracted me to this technology 20 years ago was the possibility that it would improve people's lives on the one hand, and the possibility that, like a lot of technologies, there would be gains and also some losses. And I think we always need critical voices to help like index and document and describe those losses. So it's not just the enthusiasts with a lot of times skin in the game, right? So who are chronicling and describing and indexing technological effects. So that's like the possibility that things could go horribly wrong is one of the reasons that I'm still here. I think there would be a lot of people around to like set off fireworks when this, if there's a vest that all of a sudden like 1 million people buy. But I think we need those voices in the room to sort of counter that. techno enthusiasm.
I love it. It's a great term. I love the term. That's got to stick. We gotta keep using that. And I think I'll also be sitting around with my popcorn, just like here for the show as well, because I think it is an exciting space, and you never know what's going to happen or whether something is just going to be super game changing. And sometimes it's not even for like the real reason something came out. And I think that's kind of like one of the fun parts about seeing some of the haptics come out. But Dave, I appreciate you being here so much. I'd love for you to tell people maybe something that's upcoming. You already mentioned that you're working on, which is cool, but like where people can find you, where should they learn more about you? And even if you've got like a haptics resource that you may want to point people who are just like new to this space and are like, Dave guy's saying some crazy stuff. Where do I learn more?
Yeah, so I have made like probably a lot of what I've written essentially available on my academia.edu page. So a lot of PDFs for people to download there. My book's always a good place to go if you want to learn more about the field. I always forget to plug that for some reason. You can find me on Blue Sky at Dave Parisi, Dave_Parisi. I'm sort of off Twitter a little bit at this point. And then one thing that I've got coming up that will be in the Routledge Companion to Mobile Media is a chapter on what I'm trying to theorize as mundane haptics. That should be out hopefully in the next 6 months. And then I've got a piece that will be out in 25 in the Routledge Companion to Media Archaeology. There's a lot of Routledge companions too. That'll be discussing this concept of the technohaptic reel that I'm trying to build out a little bit.
Super exciting. So keep an eye out. We'll of course we'll plug it. We're gonna plug it, of course, because you do amazing work that is important to share. And it's just such a super curious space, and I appreciate you following it. And I just appreciate you're keeping the nickname for now. It doesn't need to be official, but I think you give some really great takes, and you come at it from a perspective of just like honesty and no bubble. Just this is real. Like I've seen it. Here we are now. Here's where it could go. And I think sometimes that's just what we need of a world where things are a little bit wacky, wild, and overpromised or jarring or crazy. So thank you for being the anchor for haptics in the industry and just continuing to share.
It's a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Good to be back.
So thanks, everyone. Yeah, and you'll be back again. Dave will be back again. We'll drag him back again, whether he's excited or not. And we definitely want to see, like walking through the historic element of haptics is an exciting one. As a fan of like Computer History Museum, being able to see the history of gaming and computer technology interfaces is really important to stand on the shoulders of giants. But sadly, we've got to close up this episode. So thank you again to Dave for joining us. Anyone who's listening, check out thehapticsclub.com. Follow us on LinkedIn, X, Twitter, whatever all that stuff's called, our social medias. And anyone who wants to join in the conversation, just be sure to say hi. We're excited to have you on Discord, links in our X. And you can, of course, pick with swag at thehapticsclub.com/shop. Check out our blog. We've got amazing upcoming guests like Dave. And check us out on the Spotify, Apple Podcasts, where you'd expect us, YouTube. And just stay curious, stay hyped about what you're passionate about, and be sure to share it because people listening to conversations like this will hopefully be inspired and will want to learn more and just want to just dive right into something that maybe they'll have an impact on. They'll say something, inspire someone else, and we'll have a chain of that kind of effect, which is what we're really hoping to do at the Haptics Club. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.